want to thank you all for joining us today. We're delighted to welcome you all to the Natural History Museum and to this brand new Commons Theater. Our new discussion series, Elephant in the Room, Small Talk, Big Issues, tackles thought-provoking and sometimes controversial topics in the museum world and elsewhere. This year, the series complements NHM's latest exhibition, Reframing Dioramas, The Art of Preserving Wilderness, which offers a fresh perspective on these iconic and historic displays, and which will be on view following this discussion as well. So on behalf of the museum, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the Elephant in the Room series this season. As a neuroscientist turned science communicator, she strives to bridge the gap between science and culture, and is driven by the belief that science isn't just for scientists and has the power to connect peoples and communities. Please give a big hand for our moderator this evening, Dr. Yewande Pearse.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Marisol. And hello and welcome everyone to Elephant in the Room, Small Talk, Big Issues. It's really good to see you all for now the second in our series of 3. We're super excited to be here. And this evening's discussion, if you're not already aware, is taxidermy challenges of a lost art, or not so lost art. We'll dive into the world of taxidermy this evening, its challenges, evolution, and the ethical considerations. We'll explore taxidermy's vital role in museum collections, particularly when scientific accuracy and artistic expression coexist. From the changing methods of specimen acquisition to the ongoing balance of preserving history and the natural world, this conversation will offer insights into the challenges of both the art and science of taxidermy. We'll share how this practice has evolved and what its future may hold in this ever-changing cultural and scientific landscape. So I'm super, super excited to introduce our guest this evening. It's a particularly special panel, as you'll see, through the discussion. So first of all, please welcome, I'm not going to do this in order. I'm going to start with Allis. Allis Markham, an award-winning master taxidermist and the owner of Prey Taxidermy in Los Angeles. Allis trained right here at NHMLA under Tim Bovard before starting Prey Taxidermy in 2011. Welcome, Allis. Paloma Strong, a taxidermist and teacher at Prey Taxidermy. She has nearly a decade of experience as a taxidermist and focuses on creating pieces for museums. And last but certainly not least, Tim Bovard. After graduating from the University of Idaho, he started working for the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, that's here, full-time in 1984. Tim has attended and won awards at taxidermy review competitions and seminars, and he actively mentors the next generation of taxidermists. Thank you all for joining the panel this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, so taxidermy is pretty niche, so I would love to start our discussion before we dive into the technical aspects of taxidermy, which are fascinating, just by exploring each of your unique relationships with the natural world and what first drew you to taxidermy, and if you had any unique interactions either with nature or specifically deceased animals. Tim, you began practicing taxidermy when you were 10 years old, which is very, very sweet. What sparked this curiosity as a 10-year-old in these deceased animals?
So, like probably a lot of people here, even as a young kid, I really was fascinated by animals and nature in general, even things like plants and rocks and stuff like that. And the fascination grew to the point where, I wanted to do something with things I found. And so the first thing I brought home that I tried to actually do taxidermy on, and did do taxidermy on, was a roadkill skunk, 10 years old.
Casually.
Now, when you're 10 years old, of course, what do you need if you're going to do taxidermy is you got to have tolerant parents, right? And a tolerant family, because I can tell you my friends' parents were like, what are they letting you do? We need to talk to them. This is wrong. But luckily, and I grew up in Claremont, that's not a hotbed for taxidermy here in Southern California. My dad was a college professor. My mom was a volunteer librarian in our library at the elementary school. And we would come in here on an every couple of week basis and she would pick up things from our lending service. Some of you probably remember that. We had taxidermy in it, we had plants, we had all sort of historical stuff that you could check out and take home for your school, or even members could take it home and just have it in their house. Big program, and we would pick those things up. And while we were doing that, and this was before it was a natural history museum, I would go, of course, and wander through the diorama halls, and my mom would go to the art museum. And I rarely went to the art museum. No, I wasn't in art. My mom thought, finally, I'd become civilized. When in college, I took art history classes, right? And I said, well, I'd like to go to the Norton Simon and look at the use of light. And my mom's like, oh my goodness, my son, you know. But anyways, that's got me started. The fascination with that skunk was, could I take that little animal, take it apart, preserve it, and put it back together in a way that looked lifelike, right? Same process I'm doing today. I know a little bit more about it. I tell you, that skunk was a total fail from my perspective.
I would love to see a picture of that.
Yeah, but everybody else said, wow, Tim, that's really great. And I was like, oh. Anyways, but that's the process of trying to, it's the same thing we're doing today. It's trying to preserve a skin, whatever it is, and then make some sort of an artificial body. The materials have changed. When I first started, for mammals, mostly we used this paper mache material, and most of the dioramas, the bigger animals in there, are paper mache or burlap and plaster hollow mannequins, as opposed to what I tend to use today, which is a solid urethane foam, and I carve it in, reshape it into what I want. So yeah, a lot's changed. The materials have changed. Materials we use for plants too, because plants are just as important as the animals, right? Mm-hmm. We're trying to show a habitat in a diorama. All those processes over time have changed since, in the last 100 years. And luckily, my span of work spans the time of a lot of those changes. So I can relate to, the wax plants we have, because I've made wax plants and celluloids and stuff, all the way up to the current vacuum forming and urethane foam and epoxies and all the various plastics we have available. So, it's a cool thing. I'm lucky to be here. I'm lucky we have a intentionally designed diorama halls with sash windows so that myself and my volunteers, that Allis was once here, can go in and we can work on any diorama with just one person opening the glass, or two, or maybe three people opening the glass, going in, doing whatever we need to do, and coming out and shutting the glass. That way, on a very small budget, we've been able to continue and stay active right to the present, updating and dioramas as we go along.
And that's very unique, actually. A lot of diorama halls don't have that, so they really are just preserved in that form. This is a great start. I feel like that early introduction into taxidermy convinces me that you're definitely doing what you're always meant to do, because that instinct that you had to try and taxidermy this skunk, I don't think a lot of 10-year-olds would have had the same inspiration. But Allis, you also have a really interesting story. You grew up in Indiana, so nature, close to nature, so I'm sure that you also had a love of nature growing up. But later on, what's really interesting is that you actually made a really incredible pivot from marketing at Disney to taxidermy. So we'd love to hear sort of how you made kind of that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a town called Madison, Indiana, and it's absolutely gorgeous, historical, a mountainous river town on the Ohio River in southern Indiana, and it's beautiful. The town itself is it's the largest continuous historical area in the country. Wow. So it's all pre-1900 architecture for 133 blocks. Wow. So I grew up very rooted in history. And, and also so much of it was nature. My grandparents had a sheep farm, and there was a lot of hunting and taxidermy. And, it's weird. I grew up this kind of early 1900s lifestyle, but not at all in the early 1900s. Right. Who knows, though? We live in LA. I've got a great guy. Go Dr. Rahimi. Anyway, I digress. But I loved going in antique stores and finding things, and especially some of the like old, mink stoles, and they would have like the little feet and the eyes on them, and I just loved them. I thought they were hilarious. And so so I had some of that in my history, and also learning how to make things with my hands and an appreciation for history. And then all of that went by the wayside when I got into, marketing. And I started it did go by the wayside for me, but I got really in the beginning years of working in social media. I was very early adopter of the internet. My father was very computer savvy, and I was on there beyond just playing like Oregon Trail. I'm like making websites and being on little forums and things. And that turned into being a really early adopter of all social media, which is why my Instagram handle is just my first name. Very early adopter. And I found myself eventually, I had a small company that got bought by a company that got bought by Disney. It's all social media stuff. And all of a sudden, I'm the director of social media strategy for the entire Walt Disney Corporation. And Tim will tell you I took a little bit of a pay bump to come work here. Or not pay bump, pay. The opposite.
Really?
Yeah. We'll just say it's like a gulch. A canyon. And but I tell you, it was the best decision of my life, because you can't pay for the kind of education that I got here. Like you can't pay for it. To be immersed in the museum and learning under somebody who I like to joke and say taxidermied the dinosaurs. And no, he didn't. He wasn't old enough to work on those. He was an apprentice on dinosaurs. It was just the amazing thing where I got to work here and be immersed in that. So my joke is that I went from working at Disney and being Snow White to taxidermying my woodland friends.
So it does make sense. There is a through line. Yeah. But as we'll discover, there's a beautiful connective tissue between all three of you. And I know what it took actually to end up working with Tim and stay on working with Tim. But the same thing is true of you, Paloma. One thing I think you have in common with both Tim and Allis is that, like Tim, you discovered your love of taxidermy pretty early. But like Allis, you're very persistent, tremendous persistence. We won't call it stalking, but I'd love you to continue the story. How did you get into it?
Yeah, so like with every great field, you stalk whoever it is that you want to learn from. And so when I grew up, I just thought taxidermy was something that dead guys did in the 1800s. And that is the case if you see a lot of, go to a lot of dioramas and natural history museums. And when I moved with my family to Los Angeles as a 12-year-old, I came to this museum, the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles, and I had just never seen something so grand and just so many animals and dioramas, but there were new exhibits and there were new animals, and it clicked. There are people alive that do this, and that means that they're Googleable. And so the next day at my middle school computer lab, I typed in taxidermy near me, and as one does, and a photo of Allis popped up, and I cleared my entire life schedule, and I spent years stalking her, and I followed everyone she knew on Instagram, and I figured out everything that I could about taxidermy, and I told everyone I know, I'm going to be a taxidermist. I'm going to work for this woman, Allis Markham. She doesn't know yet, but I'm going to change her life. I will say it's creepy to stalk someone. It's creepier to stalk a taxidermist. So, but I have, both of my parents are artists, and when I told them I wanted to be a scientist, they were like, oh,
are you sure?
Are you sure? You're so great at art. And so But my mom, especially, who's here tonight, she was especially excited to hear that I wanted to do taxidermy. She just thought it was the most wonderful and gross thing. And so she bought me my first taxidermy class with Allis at Prey.
Amazing.
And I spent the whole first day being quiet and respectful and just trying to work up the courage to ask Allis if I could intern for her. And afterwards, she's asking me about my life, and she says, "Do you want to intern for me?" I felt so good. I was like, oh, it's working. It's working. I've manifested my dreams. But I had to play it cool and say, that sounds good. I'll have to check with my parents. And she did not realize I was 16, so she thought I was an adult. But I, managed to start there, and then my love of it grew. It's addicting. Once you do one, you have to do every single thing. And then I continued with my science dreams, and I got a degree in biology and continued to work on birds at the bird lab at my school. And then after my big boy college degree, I went back to my job that I've had since high school that I did not need the degree for at all. So no regrets.
It's needed on paper.
Yeah, it's the best job in the world, really.
That's awesome. Thank you all for sharing your stories, because it is such a unique field. It's really amazing to hear how you do all have these very personal stories and entry points, but into the same area. And I think what's beautiful is you've all mentioned the Natural History Museum actually being part of it. So this is a full circle moment, and that connective tissue that I mentioned earlier, I think is part of what makes, I think, this discussion so interesting, because you all bring a new perspective and idea to taxidermy. So now we can really get into it. I'd love to start with the history of taxidermy, just to level the playing field a little bit. So just really briefly, a few kind of clarifications. So Tim, nosology isn't really used widely today. Taxidermy is more commonly known. Just the definition of taxidermy is in terms of the art science, like art form.
So
science.
taxidermy, if you break down the word, right? Taxi, adjust, dermy, skin.
Adjust skin.
So taxidermy in its purest sense has to do with taking the skin off an animal, preserving that skin, and then making some sort of a mannequin. Could be paper mache, could be wrapped out. They did big things wrapped in Excelsior years ago, basically stuffed. You see some of that stuff if you go to Europe, right? Because it's still on exhibit after 200, 300 years old. It doesn't look really realistic. Anyways, so you've got these different materials, anyways, and you create this mannequin, and then you apply your skin to that mannequin, usually with some clay, to do detail areas. So that's noses and ears and things like that. You want to have a soft look because your foam is hard, right? And so we're trying to create this illusion of life. And so by using some clay, as we put the skin on and having a slow drying glue under the skin that's going to eventually dry and hold that skin tight to the mannequin, we can manipulate taxidermy, that skin, to the point where hopefully when we're done, we end up with something that looks alive, right? It doesn't look like the piece of jerky it is. This little sparrow here, which is excellent,
It's beautiful.
that Paloma did, is a piece of jerky. But it doesn't look like a piece of jerky. It looks like a live sparrow.
Doesn't taste like it either.
So that's the basics. And so all the way back to the 20s, when John Rowley and Oliver Smith were here as the taxidermists, they sculpted everything from scratch, typically sculpting over clay, over a skeleton. This is for mammals. And then they made from a plaster mold that they made of each one of those separate sculptures for each animal. They would make a paper mache or burlap and plaster form, which then they went through the taxidermy mounting process on, going back. That exact process stayed that way in museums and especially in this museum, until I got here in 1984. I still followed that process some, but then a new material came into being, urethane foam, and that could speed things up, because now I could take a form and resculpt it into what I wanted, and I didn't have to necessarily go through and sculpt over a skeleton in a matter of a day. I could take a form and resculpt it and reshape it for my animal and then put a skin on it. So that speeded things up. And of course, tanning techniques got better. The preservation techniques got better so that we could do things and not have them, fall apart. We do have things here that are on exhibit that are over 100 years old, especially quite
incredible.
a few birds like that. And you would never know they were 100 years old. That's also because they're in a museum and they get proper care. As Allis and Paloma and myself who've seen collections outside of museums, oh my goodness, sometimes after 5 years they look like,
Looks a little scary.
yikes, did I do that? But yeah, anyways,
Thank you, Tim. We're going to come back to process because it's just so fascinating. And I think just having that basic understanding of, okay, what taxidermy is and how do you get that is where the magic happens in terms of creating this illusion. But you mentioned outside of a museum context. So, Allis, in terms of the fields of taxidermy, you've got trophy taxidermy, museum taxidermy, commercial taxidermy. Just what is the significant kind of difference between them?
Well, museum taxidermy, which is what, Tim does, which is what we do at Prey, is taxidermy that's done predominantly from salvage specimens. So when we get a mountain lion, which in the studio right now, we have 3 of them in process, and they've all been car strikes. In California, mountain lions are protected, and so unfortunately one of the things, though, that does happen is they're hit by vehicles. People aren't meaning to do this, but it does happen, and it happens quite a bit. And so what'll happen is Fish and Wildlife will give a permit. So a certain nature center or museum has a permit to have one, and then we are sub-permitted to work on it, and it goes in a museum. That's a salvage specimen. Same with the birds that are hit by, hit window strike birds, things like that. That's all salvage. I mean, unfortunately, this bird, right, would have run into a window, and that's how it ended up on our workbench, and then we'll now go to the Moore Lab of Zoology and be there. And so that's museum taxidermy. And then, but however, in the past, museum specimens have been collected, right? Many of the specimens on display here at the museum were part of scientific collecting. But I think it's still important, and collecting still does happen for collections today, because, Paloma, who's worked in collections at the Moore Lab of Zoology, can say that, they'll go out and collect birds, and then you can look at the stomach contents and say, oh, wow, what's going on with these? Why are they smaller? Why is the, feather looking like this? And you find microplastics in the, in their system. So it is still important to do scientific collecting, and then those animals can also go for taxidermy or go in the collection so that people can study them from the 1700s all the way up to today. So that's museum taxidermy, and that's collecting where it has its roots. And then we have commercial taxidermy, which is a lot of what I grew up with and what many people are here probably familiar with, which is you go hunting, right? And you get, as my dad tried and very rarely got, that deer every year. And then we have venison in the freezer, which I think hunting is a really sustainable way to eat when it's done legally and you have a tag and you're not breaking the law and poaching. And so commercial taxidermy is done from a byproduct of that hunt, right? It's okay, well, nobody kills a deer just to put the head on the wall. That's absolutely ridiculous. The head is just a byproduct of that. Or duck hunting, things like that. People are, they're going to harvest the breasts and everything. Trophy hunting is going out and doing maybe big game hunting, something like that. And typically done in different countries within Africa. I've actually been to South Africa, and So trophy hunting there, I will say this, and I'll let people make up their own mind about it. I think when it comes to trophy hunting, it's good to understand where the money goes and where the meat goes. Okay? People go there and they will pay, upwards of $50,000 for one animal. Maybe like $150,000 or something for an elephant. Now, I personally, I don't want to go do that, and I wish that wasn't being done, but that money will actually go for conservation, and it will go to help preserve lands and herds when you have a government system that is actually utilizing it for that and to protect them from poachers. Look, Africa is a very big place, and it's so many different countries and so many different governments and so many different social and government systems within this huge continent. And so, if I'm going to judge trophy hunting, I think I'm going to judge it on an individual basis. And there's a lot that happens with baiting animals. There's a lot that happens with professional hunters actually helping to poach. And then there is a system where it also does actually help with conservation, whether we like it or not, because our world is a broken system. And sometimes you just have to play the game even if it's rigged. I hate to say it, but yeah.
Yeah, I think understanding sort of the multi-layers of that, and we'll be talking about the ethics as well further down the conversation.
It's sticky and it's hard to talk about because it's nothing that I want to be going on. But at the same time, it's like, well, if that money can help preserve, the breeding members, the young, and keep that herd safe, how do we feel about that? I go back and forth.
And protect the habitat.
There we go.
Habitat. No, that's a really important point that you raise, and I think I agree with you in that it's an individual basis, and there are so many different forms of taxidermy, commercial being very different from trophy or museum. So we'll continue to unpack that, but I think that's a really important point just for everyone to understand. But just Paloma, would also love to get kind of your insights, being relatively the newest member of the field, kind of how, with your understanding of the history of taxidermy, how this foundation feeds into your practice. Like when you discovered that it's actually people who are still alive doing taxidermy, kind of where do you lead the history and like take things forward, and how much of the history is still present in your work and your practice?
Great question. Well, what's really interesting about taxidermy and what I think I love about it so much is it has changed so much. This field is meant for innovation, but at the same time, there's so much that goes into the roots of taxidermy, and it really hasn't changed at all. And everyone who gets into it and has gotten into it, in the context of the different times and all that, but they get into it because they love nature, and all they want to do is chase what nature has made. And that's the same thing with science, is you're always kind of going towards the truth. You never get there. And with taxidermy, you're never gonna you're never gonna quite get to the truth. You're never gonna quite, recreate exactly what nature has created. But it's people throughout all these years, they want to get to that point. And in taxidermy, so much has changed over the years that has only gotten better. And I mean, you mentioned the taxidermy in the 17 and 1800s when it was collecting. A lot of the taxidermists had never even seen the animals that they worked on. There were people out in the field collecting animals and sending them back with, hopefully a drawing, but sometimes just a description. And then it was taxidermists in the UK just trying their best to make a
If you want to see an example of that, the Paris, which I do love, their natural history museum, it's an amazing game of telephone.
Yeah,
it's somebody there that
collected it. The person who collected it, who saw it in real life, is different from the person who field prepped it, is different from the person who packed it, is different from the person who unpacked it, and it's just a nightmare.
It's amazing.
Oh, where can I see this? I need to see a visual.
It's pretty great. Yeah. So, I mean, are you talking about the walrus?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Can
Yes.
you please describe the walrus?
There
What went
was
wrong
a
there?
walrus. I believe that one's in Paris. No,
It's in Paris.
it's in Paris. Is that the one you were going to talk about? Yeah.
You're going to talk.
Oh, okay. Yes. There's a walrus, which, if you guys are familiar with walruses, which they're very large and wrinkled. Very importantly, they have lots of wrinkles. And the person who put together this walrus many, many years ago blew it up like a Party City balloon.
Oh, wow.
And it's on display, and it's massive. These are giant creatures, which is an important part of taxidermy, is realizing, how big something is. The scale is off for the walrus. For the walrus, it is off. But now, I mean, it's so different. I mean, I've got a computer in my pocket right now that I can, look up whatever animal I want to in the
Live
whole
or-
world.
yeah.
You too? You got a computer?
No,
in your
it's
pocket?
because we have video and we have images.
Yeah.
I don't have a computer.
But it's just the future is changing so much, and I know Allis will talk about the innovations later. But it's really great being able to draw on people in history and exhibits from history, and really see that it all has the same purpose, which is to inspire people to want to care about nature, to inspire people like me who want to have a hand in recreating nature, and hopefully inspiring people to care about the
preserve
future of
and
these
preserve it.
animals. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's actually a really great segue to the next topic, which is the purpose of taxidermy. We've heard a lot about the history and this form, but what's the power and the purpose? And I think you've just hit the nail on the head. It's the inspiration behind that. So we'd just love to hear your takes as well on how taxidermy does provide this different perspective in a world where it's a digital age. There's lots of technological and virtual experiences that allow us to become closer to things. But taxidermy is a very physical thing, Tim. So we'd love to hear, with all of your years of experience, what still holds true about a physical, like this bird here on this beautiful bird on this tree.
So the power of looking at something that looks real, I think, that we accept as real. One of the things we've done all these surveys through the years at the museum and had people respond after looking at the dioramas, and they have a certain comfort factor, even though they've never been to Africa. They look at something and it looks like a real place, and they accept it as being a real place and animals in that place, even though it's all an illusion, right? But that's a powerful illusion. We can see stuff, oh my goodness, the nature videos and stuff online. You can Google so many images up. Of course, that's pretty recent, the technology that provides that and allows that. But still, it's a fleeting thing. You can't walk up and stand there. And of course, if you go to a zoo, even a great zoo, well, the animal may not be out, or it won't be in its natural habitat. And so we can't, you're seeing it a little bit out of context. When you see the average trophy mount or the average commercial mount for taxidermy, which is not what Paloma and Allis do, it's out of context usually. Maybe it's on a small habitat base, but maybe it's just hanging on the wall. Maybe it's on a very simple base. But still, if it's very well done, and Paloma, who was just at the World Championships, saw, I know, some really, really fine taxidermy, individual pieces that you look at them and you're like, wow. So I think taxidermy has that still. It's amazing. Sometimes we've gone around the wheel here. Obviously, I've been here long enough that, maybe diorama's not so much. And then, well, it comes back around again. And they can do something that you can't do any other way. Plus, because we've got the computers in our pockets, and all these images, and we deal a lot in the virtual world, right? All of us, even older folks like myself, to see something that's 3D and real, which is what I see when I go, and Allis is nice enough to invite me to some of her classes, is that the fascination is they're working on something real. Yeah. They're producing something that's real and trying to capture that illusion. And we don't get to do that. Most people don't get to do that. And so for some people, that's a fascination.
It's awe-inspiring. I think that everyone agrees they're so immersive. And I mean, returning to the fact that you all had these early experiences with natural history museums and dioramas, there is something that makes you go, wow, about being in front of something that your brain doesn't quite put together. It knows it's not real, but it still gives you some sort of emotive response to that. Is really powerful. Would love, Alice, for you to...
I mean, what I would say along with that is that when you are looking at a taxidermied animal, and to Tim's point, with the dioramas, you get the chance to see it in its natural environment as interpreted by diorama artists, scientists, biologists, botanists, etc. But what's interesting with looking at a taxidermied animal or habitat or diorama, we're all on our screens so much. And we can easily go on Facebook right now, look at a controversial post, look at how people are treating each other. They would never say that to each other's faces, right? It's the same way when we are faced with an animal and it's the real thing right in front of you. You get the different connection than you would if it's behind a screen, because there's more empathy when we see things in real life and they are in front of us. They are no longer abstract pixels. And I think that connection's important.
That is a really, really important point that you're making, that there is a difference between what you're seeing in front of you and what you're seeing virtually. And the creation of that illusion, we're going to talk about process shortly, but the creation of that illusion is almost magic, because I just want to, you won't be able to see closely, but if you had a chance to see some of the displays before, like even this bird and like the way that the eyes are shiny. Why are the eyes shiny, Paloma? Like there seems to be some life in it. But it's a point, isn't it? Like you see something like this and you immediately connect it to real life and it touches you in a different way. So I think, thank you for sharing that insight. I think that really does kind of reframe how we can think of some of these taxidermy pieces and dioramas and diorama halls. They're not that many, which is interesting. You are kind of active on social media, Paloma. So I wonder how, sort of knowing that diorama halls are sort of disappearing and having this passion for it, how you kind of communicate that by social media and how you kind of reach younger generations to sort of still see that power.
One thing that makes me very proud of my generation. I know it's always kids these days and, they're going to ruin the world and all that. But when I first started getting into birding, it was me and a bunch of old ladies, and we would go on our little nature walks, and it was so great. But they're like, "Oh, I can't believe you're so young and you're getting into this." And then as I've gotten older, it's more and more young people.
That's cool.
Oh, it's the best. And because it's so the people who are, coming into being 18 and they're able to, vote and have a more powerful voice in telling their stories and advocating for the stories of people around them, they really care about nature and they care about what's been done to this planet. They care about the creatures on it. And it's a lot easier to connect with people who already care. And I've noticed that it's, people tend to receive things very positively. And the people who don't, there's a block button for a reason, but also, you can just ignore them and it's fine. But for the most part, it's a lot of curated algorithms that bring people of similar interests together as well. So a lot of the times I'll get people commenting, "Oh my gosh, I was at the World Show. Oh, did you see this piece? Did you see? Oh my gosh!" And it's people who really care, or it's I do glass blowing, but it's a really similar thing. And oh, tell me about your techniques. And it's a very interactive and collaborative place, and just young people really do care, and it's so fantastic. But they want to get into it. They want to be involved, and I think that's a really big thing, is communicating how you do things and what goes on behind the scenes and how can we help and when's the next bird watching meeting.
Building a sense of community.
I feel great about the younger generations. I feel fantastic about them. You know, I spend most of my time with younger people because I have younger people in my classes. You know, Paloma's younger. I don't think you're a kid anymore. But
I can legally drink at a bar. I can do it.
But yeah, I mean, we have young students, we have apprentices and summer interns, one of which I was very afraid of because she's 16 and like so cool, terrifying.
She was terrifying.
She was so cool.
Oh my God.
So cool.
She
And 300,000 like TikTok
more than that.
Like, I'm so
She was so talented. Yeah, she's a cosplayer. And if you're into
Ridiculous.
cosplay, you will be a fantastic taxidermist, by the way. If you do
Yes,
anything
well.
like that.
But they're so crafty and they love making things and really caring about the future and the environment, and also really delving in on niche subjects, special interests, especially now it's like normal and okay for you to let people know you're neurodiverse.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. We get so many like Gen Z, the Zoomers, Alphas, I don't know what they are. But anyway, they come in and they're fantastic and we love them. And then of course we have like, I mean, you know, shout out to my other students. Hey, Maureen. But we get people from all ages though, all walks of life. And what's so fun is that they come in and they all have this one really weird thing in common, which is that they want to do taxidermy. And so we've had like, there's like full on like friend groups that have been created. Tim knows, he started it. So he started it. But yeah, it's great. But I feel really good about future generations. Absolutely.
And how it will evolve over time as well. That's really great to hear that, you know, that something like taxidermy is changing and evolving. And we're going to talk about process and techniques now and how that actually also changes to follow. But Tim, one of the things I've heard you say on multiple occasions is just the importance of referencing. Like, your taxidermy is only as good as your referencing. So would love to just dive in a little bit into the techniques, but in terms of mammals, because it's different for different animals, and kind of you touched on this in the introduction, but what are like the steps to get there and create this fabulous illusion of life?
So for me, it's reference. Unlike the taxidermist way before me who couldn't access photos and movies maybe. It's interesting, one of the earliest really fine sculpting taxidermists, Carl Akeley, designed the first relatively small mobile movie camera that became something that the movie studios used because he wanted something to accurately record how the animals moved and their whole habitat in a movie version. Now, there was no camera like that out there. So Carl Akeley designed something. Pretty crazy stuff. But and when I was first growing up and looking at things, well, there were books and there were magazines with pictures. And I would sometimes buy a book or a magazine because it had one photo that was just, wow. It really captured
And the real deal.
really captured that animal. And I've got file after file, because taxidermists here at the museum, starting way back, I mean, I've got magazine cutouts from like the 30s and 40s up in my files.
It's very cool.
Animal pictures, right? Was Life magazine, right? That kind of thing, National Geographic. And they cut those out and they saved them in files. So if they're ever doing that animal, they had a photo.
Something to look at.
And like I say, I've got file after file cabinet and things like that at home. Hundreds, really thousands of books like that I've purchased, they purchased through the years. Of course, now what can I do? I can look at the computer, I can Google that animal, and chances are I'm going to get so many options, and I'm going to get it from all different views and angles that I don't have to look in those files that much. But that's why I have to start, okay? Because I want to have live reference. Then when that animal is skinned for a mammal, I take about 100 measurements. I take measurements before I skin it, I take them after, so I've got the muscles referenced, and of course I'm saving the skeleton. And in today's world, generally, I then buy a commercial form and I completely modify it. And those of you who've been by the table the taxidermy table upstairs, or if you've looked in the book, you've seen a series of maybe the male lion and the lion diorama. And it's an older male, and he's scratching his ear. I've got cats at home, watch him do that all the time, okay? But I had a really nice reference picture of that, and I thought, that's a nice soft look. I like that. It's just, and if you spend any time around cats, you know they'll freeze in the middle of a motion, right? And something will catch their eye, and they'll just hold it and look at you or look at whatever the distraction is, and then, maybe they go back to.
They do that.
It's a behavior, right? Trying to capture that behavior. So that's my start, and then my medium in today's world mostly is a foam mannequin that I'm then cutting up and resculpting to fit my animal and that particular pose. And then, like I say, I'm adding clay to it to make it and glue. So as I put it back together, I can create the illusion of softness, of life, rather than this hard, dried out piece that it's going to end up being. My success on that, to me, one of them was back when we were working on those two lions in the center of the lion diorama that are greeting. They're doing the headbutt. Things that people have cats at home, you've seen it. And you've probably had them do it to you. And cats do it all the time, but lions definitely, because they're communal in nature, they do it a lot visually. So I wanted to capture that. Got a friend out here, won the world championships at 21 with a really cool leopard. Anyways, I told him, this is what I want to do. I want to do a pair of lioness greeting. He's like, Tim, he's a commercial taxidermist. Nobody who hunts a lion wants to show it doing a headbutt with another lion, right? They want something, an active pose, whatever. That's not snarling. Daniel was like, I got to do this. So he came out and we did that. And after we got it together, worked around the clock for a few days until he went off, and then I sewed for a few more days. Once I had them together, I told my boss at the time, and I said, okay, send people through. I've been there all night working, of course. They started coming in with the operations people at 6, and then they probably 150 staff. And when they stepped into that room, whether they were a cat person or not, and they saw those two cats headbutting, they all went, oh. All right, they got it. I didn't have to put any other writing out there. They got it. These are social animals. That's how they're tied together. And it's the female-based, prides are female-based. That told the story. Much better than what we originally had, which is what they had. They had a male, a female, and 2 cubs. Mappa and the kids. Well, that's not the typical lion pride. So that's one of the things that's in some ways the most visual of what's out there, but yeah.
And I love that it's all about the attitude, achieving the attitude in these animals. And we talked at the beginning about this art and science, and actually where one begins and one ends. And I know that your background is a lot of science, but creating that is arguably, that's where the art comes in. Would you agree with like that distinction between art and science? Where does kind of the measurements and everything kind of play into then that artistic expression for you?
Yeah, I think it does, and then there's an interpretation. Everything we do, right? If we're humans, right? There's no piece of taxidermy I've done that's perfect out there. I unfortunately, having been here long enough, I get to look at 40-year-old mistakes. But luckily, in most cases, they're close enough into the realm that you, as the average viewer, will accept them, especially when they're in a diorama surrounded by there might be 10 or 15, 20 other animals in that same diorama for you to discover if you look at the corners, and our new labels kind of highlight some of that. And that's probably what I mostly love about our dioramas is the chance to make them more like nature. And so adding the little things, adding reptiles, adding amphibians, adding small birds, so that like after I renovated our African Hall in 2005, 2006, added a whole lot of birds to it. Well, for Kimball Garrett, that became our African Bird Hall. And there's actually more birds in our African Mammal Hall than there are mammals. And if you think about it, when you're out in the wild and you're looking, especially if you're looking for birds, you tend to see a lot more birds than you do mammals. So it's sort of the way nature is. But I like that discovery. I like it when I'm out walking. I'd like the viewers to be able to do it with a diorama.
Yeah, and you mentioned birds. Birds are a little bit different. Paloma, how does that sort of, with your practice and being able to make these creations, how does that change a little bit?
Not at all. Not at all. Totally different. Yeah. So the reason I find birds so special is the biggest difference between mammals and birds is with mammals, you have a pose and you have the pose kind of set in mind before you put it all together. And is that me or you? That's
No.
okay, go on.
Always on his phone.
Oh, I know. That's always texting. With mammals, you have a preset pose. And because with the foam, you carve it, you change it, and then you get the skin on and you're committed to where it is. But birds are really different. So you take a whole frozen bird, just a bird that has been in the freezer for a while, and you take it out and you do prep work. And so you remove most things inside of it, the body cavity, but you keep a couple of the bones. You keep the wing bones and the leg bones and the skull, and you clean everything like you would eat off of it. Like you have to go crazy for museum taxidermy, at least. You want things to last a long time and not be, susceptible to pests. And then you carve a little body or you wrap a little body and you get clay in the skull and clay in the eyes. And then you add glass eyes. You put it all back together. You wash it, you fluff it, you make it all beautiful. And then that's where the fun starts, because you put it all together. It looks like crap. It looks terrible. You've done all this work and you're getting wires into legs and wires into wings just so you have all this control of how it looks. You put it together and it's looking at you like this and it's really out of place. And then you get to, pull up your reference, and then you get to spend, a couple of days if you can prolong the process a bit, but you get a really nice chunk of time where you get to ask, okay, little bird, what do you want to do? Okay, so your right side is a little messed up. Your left side is going to be the show side. And you get to, place the wings where you want it to place. And you get to play with the attitude of the bird.
Because that skin is still wet.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you get to pose it and groom it. And you can spend time moving every individual little feather and capturing the attitude that you see. And for me, it's so great being able to work on native birds that I see every weekend at the LA River. But I get to capture them as if they never were seen in the first, as if I've never caught them. Because there's a kingfisher pair that I stalk at the LA River. I try to see them every time I'm there. And some of my photos, they look natural, and half of them, they've clocked me and then they take off. But with taxidermy and with birds, I get to, you get to look at them as if they've never been seen. And you get to capture them in this natural pose. So birds are, I'm obviously, you might have guessed I'm a bit of a bird nerd. I studied really, I focused on ornithology in college, and they have a very special, I have a bird name. My parents set me up for that. But there's something really, really special about being able to play with the bird once it's all put together. And then you get it to dry how you want it. It's fantastic.
I really like that point that you made about kind of, again, recreating that natural habitat, like as though you're getting this privilege to peer into them in their natural state, which is all part of this illusion. Allis, you have worked both with mammals and with birds, but one of the really cool things that you're doing is actually changing some of the techniques. And we've got some of these models here, which I don't want us to run out of time before we get a chance to get to.
Yeah.
This is 3D printing. These are 3D printing.
Those are, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I would love you to talk a little bit about that.
An older technique. This would be this is a death mask. This is a domestic dog, Chihuahua mix. And this death mask is made out of plaster. And the way that these have traditionally been created lately is taking alginate, which is if you've ever had like a mold taken of your teeth, and you'll put that on top of, on its little face, right? And you have the fur on there though. So you have to be very careful. I put hair conditioner on the fur first. and then that alginate sets up like a gel, like a gelatin kind of. And then you can pop that off, and then inside the alginate, it's now a hard little gelatin mold. You pour in plaster, and then you can pop out a death mask, aka a plaster cast. Okay, that's great, but you kind of always worry about losing some fur when you do that. And you can look at this, death mask, and you can see little bits of fur in here. And so there's always a little bit of a risk, and the animal's sitting out, and, it can be a little harrowing if you worry about things as much as I do. However, with 3D, oh, look, you're my assistant now. Look at this. With 3D scanning and printing, not only can you just scan the animal and get a death mask of a mammal without touching the fur. For the first time, I've been able to take death masks of birds. So this is a peregrine falcon. So this is for the California Wildlife Center. And unfortunately, it died at their rehab facility. But when it came in, I was able to scan the head, and I can see exactly how far out those eyeballs of the peregrine falcon sit, and then this hood over the eyes, all this amazing geometry. So I have a reference cast for when I put this bird back together. And I have to say, when I did this particular peregrine falcon for them, it's the best bird of prey I've ever done. Because I can get out the calipers, and I can measure this and then measure mine, measure this and then measure mine, and then sit there and do that forever until the end of time, or until I get it right. But then also with mammals, normally with a death mask is a little mini one. Thank you.
That's true to size.
Yes, that's true. So, and with mammals too, normally with the death mask, we'll use that and take a mold of the death mask in order to make a mold to actually create a facial form. This is a death mask of a cat where I've just scanned it. And so I skip that step, and I can just make a mold of this to make my face form. But I can also make little reference casts like this. Paloma was working on a coyote pup, and I was like, oh, I made a little reference cast for you. Printed this out in the resin printer, and she can hold, like if her coyote cub is like here, she can hold this and see if that fits that profile. Right? And she can look at this and everything. So even just having a smaller reference cast handy, it's very, very helpful. Now, yes, have I printed things, like why can't we just put the skin directly over one of these? It's heavy, it's brittle,
hard.
You can't carve into it. There's a million things. Yes, I have done it. No, I did not like it. I have also printed the molds and then poured polyurethane into the molds, which I made a multi.
It was like a 30-part mold.
That's why I handed it to you. But she did it, and it actually ended up looking amazing. But now I'm like, okay, maybe that's not the way. So we're going to be playing around doing that with like a filament printer. I've also used like the giant CNC arm things that carve giant blocks of foam. I just love playing with toys.
I love that. And I love all of these different innovations as well. And the fact that it's the dental mold as well is really surprising.
Oh, the dental
to
mold
me.
is so fun with the
I'm never
alginate.
gonna
I
go
will
to the
never get
dentist
sick of
the
making
same.
classic death masks. So for instance, in the taxidermy studio here upstairs, Tim has all these death masks that some of them date back like pre-Tim, and then there's some from the one on exhibit. Yeah, when
All
was
the way
Chris?
back to the 20s.
What about Chris in Reframing Dioramas, the gorilla?
That's from 96.
So he took there's a beautiful, beautiful death mask of Chris was the silverback gorilla from the LA Zoo that Tim took. So if you're in Reframing Dioramas, it's in the glamping tent.
Yeah, it's incredible.
This is glamping
Safari
tent.
tent.
Yeah, there we go. Glamping these days, Tim, get with it. But anyway, it's there and you can see it, and it's incredible. But I wonder today, and Tim has done some 3D scanning with me, and I wonder today if you felt like the technology would be there that you would scan his face instead.
Yeah, I think it might be. I've just done it with you, but the thing about gorillas or lots of animal primates with bare faces, the whole different techniques there. Is especially an older animal like Chris, who's 31, he's got a lot of wrinkles. And that texture and stuff is what, of course, makes Chris who he is. And so if I'd done him, so he ended up being a sculpted face part that I used that death mask to create an artificial face, because if I used the skin, he would have looked like a tanned skin. And there's no way I could have captured all the wrinkles and texture that's there. It's just not possible with a tan skin. So, yeah, it would have been. I think it's.
All right. Well, I've got monkeys in the freezer, so we can play.
I mean, I have to say, we actually have to wrap up because you guys, just your insights into taxidermy, I feel like this could be an ongoing conversation. Luckily, we have a cocktail hour right after this. So just a couple of things, if you do manage to get a chance to speak to Tim, your story about the polar bear, how you made the polar bear taxidermy, more about Chris. Just incredible in terms of how you adapt these techniques. And also we didn't get to talk a little bit about like the ethical considerations, but your story, Allis, about the seal part, I feel like is just really important. So we're going to wrap up the conversation now. I don't think we have time for... We'll have time for one question, but then again, I'm sure everyone has tons of questions, but we are going to have the cocktail hour, so you will get a chance to ask more questions. So if you come down to one of the NHM staff who's holding a microphone just at the side, we'll be able to take a question. We'll just have one. There we go.
I already said one.
Just time for one question, but you can ask it afterwards.
We're here all night.
If I see you, you good.
Yeah, I'll find you.
Hi, thanks for this talk. It's so interesting. I have no background in taxidermy, so this was really fascinating and enlightening, especially your story, Allis, about how you left your previous work for this. I'm quitting my job tomorrow to pursue mine.
Congrats. Yay. Round of applause.
Hiring, we'll talk after this, but I was wondering, because taxidermy is not a very common art, so you must have had a really strong internal drive, and it'd be very useful to me to know kind of what that voice is that propels you continuously, and anyone can answer this, every day to pursue this very interesting art form.
For me, I just ended up working in social media. I just ended up there. And yay, I got to a place where I was technically successful, but it's not what I necessarily chose. I spent a lot of time just trying to be the person I thought I should be, and get the good job, buy the house, do this, do that. And I didn't have a moment to stop and think about what I wanted to do. And then actually coming here as an adult, moving out to LA and seeing the Natural History Museum here was like, I wonder, same thing as Paloma. It's so similar. Where I was like, somebody makes these. Who is this person? And then I had a little natural history collection going on at my house. I always collected antiques. I had some of those creepy little mink stoles from when I was a kid. and yeah, I still wear them. I do. That's fine. They're old, it's fine. But I really missed working with my hands because I grew up doing some ceramics, but I didn't go to art school and I didn't go to school for science. And I just kind of decided I wanted to figure out how to do taxidermy. And so I started researching online, did some very bad projects by myself, went up and took a little 2-week course in Montana on commercial stuff, and then got back here and I stalked him. So the stalking has continued. And
Stalk your future employer.
Oh, but I met with him, and after hearing Tim speak is when I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. So then I tricked him into let me volunteer, and then I just was like, I'll just quit my job, and then I just worked for free until they were too embarrassed not to pay me. So honestly, it's true. And what keeps me inspired is not only now I get to pull Tim over to work with me, and we just did some work for Tim here, but honestly, it's been students like Paloma, and then my newer students, many of which are here tonight. It's getting the same enthusiasm that I got from Tim, and now I get to kind of shine it on. And I just love it because every day is different. Everything I work on, even if it's the same species, it's different. And I just love everything always being just different and fun. And it's not, I don't have those Disney dollars anymore, but oh my gosh, for the life that I have, you can't buy this. You can't buy doing your passion. You just have to pay for it. with in the best way possible, right? With your time and energy and love. It's great. Thank you, and
Alice.
congratulations, and good luck.
Congratulations for quitting your job tomorrow. Thank you so much for this discussion. Like I said, so many more questions. I knew very little about taxidermy, and I have learned so much from the three of you, and I love how you're connected. And I can't wait for us to keep discussing in the cocktail hour. But before we conclude, just a reminder that the last elephant in the room is going to be on the 20th of March, and that's going to be the Many Faces of Conservation, which I think is a nice follow-up to the taxidermy and inspiring this conservation effort. So finally, just a round of applause once more for Allis, Paloma, and Tim. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone here and for the museum. And
Thank you for coming, and we look forward to talking to you up in the African Hall or wherever you find us.
See you there.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pearse.
thank you, Dr. Pearse.